Hi, in this video we will give a short introduction to SQL Server and how to design tables and implement them inside SQL Server. First, we will have a short introduction to database system in general. Today, everything is stored in a database. So a database is a structured way to store lots of information, and the information is stored in different tables. Typical examples are bank system, account systems, information in web pages such as Facebook, Wikipedia, YouTube, etc. All the information here are stored in databases. Here we see an old-fashioned database that we had in the good old days. Today we don't have it like this, but everything is stored in a database management system. So here we have some examples of database management systems. We have Oracle, MySQL, Maria Database, Sybase, Microsoft Access, and the one we are going to use today is Microsoft SQL Server. But we have hundreds of different database systems today. So SQL Server, we have different editions of SQL Server. We have SQL Standard, we have SQL Enterprise, etc. All these editions cost a lot of money, but for our purpose we can use the SQL Server Express edition, which is free to use, and you can download it for free from internet. Here you see a system sketch of SQL Server. We have the database engine that is running in the background, doing all the job, storing information, etc. And then we have a graphical user interface called the Management Studio. Here we can create databases, create new tables, run queries, etc. So here we see the SQL Server Management Studio. On the left side we have the different databases. We can right click to create new databases, and inside a database we can right click to create tables, see list of all tables, views, stored procedures, etc. In the window to the right we can write queries, see results from the data inside the database, etc. So let's start creating a new database from scratch. We just right click on the databases inside SQL Server, select new database, and then we just need to enter a name, etc. So let's create this example from scratch. Now I have started SQL Server, so let's start creating the database. So you just right click on databases, select new database, and then you just need to enter a name. In our case we are going to create a library system, so we just call the database library like this. All the other information here could just be default, so you just click OK. Then you see here our database has been created. So the next now is to start designing and implementing the tables inside the database. Here you see an example of a typical so-called ER diagram, entity relationship. This is a diagram showing all the tables and the relationship between them. Here we have two tables, one book table, and we have the columns inside that table, book ID, which is the primary key. We could have book title, summary, etc. And then we could have another table called the chapter, where we have a chapter ID, which is a primary key, and we have a book ID, which is a foreign key to the book table. And then we could have chapter number, chapter title, etc. Here are some best practice examples how to design and implement the tables and the columns inside. So for tables, it's a good practice to use uppercase and singular form. For instance, like this, student and not students. It's also a good practice to use the so-called Pascal notation. For instance, student ID, like this. And also all the tables should have a primary key. So in the course table, you should have a primary key called course ID, etc. And also the primary key should typically be an identity column, meaning it's the number within that column just increased by 1. So the first course to enter has the course ID 1, and then 2, 3, etc. For some columns you should also use the required column or a property. Typically book title should be a required column, and you should not allow to have null data inside that column. And also you should standardize on some few data types like integer, float, varchar, datetime, etc. So let's see how we create tables inside SQL Server. So we want to create these two tables, the book table and the chapter type table inside SQL. You can do that in different way. The first approach is to use the designer tool inside SQL Server. So then on our database, you just right click on tables, select new table, and then we can start entering the column name, the data type, etc. So let's start creating our two tables from scratch. So then inside SQL Server, we select our database and the tables here. You right click, select table, and then on the right side we can start entering the name of the columns. So we have book ID, which should be the primary key, and typically we select integer for this one. And next we select book title. Typically this could be a varchar, so let's say varchar 50, and then next the summary, like this. Summary could also be a varchar. Typically the summary is a little bit longer than the book title, so we could use varchar 255 or something. And then next, since the book ID is the primary key, we can just right click here and select set primary key. And then next we click save to save the table. So let's name the table book, like this, and then click OK. If we now go to tables here, then we see the book table has been created. So let's create the second table, the chapter table. We right click here on tables, table, and then start entering the column names. Chapter ID, which is the primary key. So we find the proper data type, integer, and then next book ID, which is the foreign key, should also be an integer. Next we have a chapter number, could be an integer or it could be a varchar. So we just use this in this case varchar. And then next chapter title. Also use varchar for this one for simplicity. Like this. Click save to save the table. Chapter. Like this. And also you have to remember this one should be the primary key. So you just right click here, set the primary key. You can also set that the primary key should be an identity column. So you just select the column, go to the properties window here, identity specification, select yes here. So identity specification is identity. Set this 1 to yes, and then identity increment and seed 1 1 like this. So you do the same for the book table. Identity specification is identity. Yes, like this. Next, we want to set the foreign key property. So for a book ID, this should be a foreign key because the primary key is inside the book table. So we just right click here, book ID, set relationships, and here we set the relationship and the foreign key relationship. So here, select table and column specification, click on this small symbol, select the primary key table, which is book, and select the book ID, which is the primary key in the primary key table, and then the foreign key table is the chapter table, and it should be the book ID here as well. So I'll click OK to create the foreign key like this and close. So now we have created these two tables. Just refresh here. You see how created the book table and the chapter table. Another approach to create the tables inside SQL Server is to use the database diagram. So we just on our database, select database diagram, right click and select new database. And then inside the diagram you can right click and select new table, enter the name for the table and start entering the column name, data types, etc. Like we did previously. So let's do that from scratch. So we have our library database and we have the database diagram. We right click, select new database diagram, click close here, right click, new table, select or write the table name, book, like this, and now we can enter the column name, data type, etc. So just use the same column name as in the previous example, book ID, which should be the primary key, was an integer, like this. We have the book title, it should be a varchar, so you just use varchar 50, and then we have the summary, which could be varchar, and you could use varchar 255 like this, and then we could select the book ID to be the primary key, so it's set primary key like this, and you save it. You also need to save the diagram, so we could just call the diagram library like this, and then now we have created the book table, and now we want to create the chapter table. So let's right click, new table, chapter, OK, and then we have the primary key, chapter ID, which is an integer. We have book ID, which should be the foreign key, so we use an integer here also. And we have chapter number. In this case, you just use varchar for this one, and chapter title. This, I use varchar for this one also. Like this, and then here the chapter ID should be the primary key, like this. Set primary key, like this. So now we have two tables, and next is to create the relationship between them. So the book ID here is the primary key, and we have this book ID should be the foreign key in this table. So we just use our mouse, click on book ID here in the primary key table, and then go to the foreign key table, select book ID and release the mouse, and then SQL Server knows that we want to have to link the book ID in the book table and the book ID in the chapter table. So you just click OK, and then we are finished, and we have created the primary key foreign key relationship. Next, we want to insert some data into the tables. We can do that in two different ways. Either use the Management Studio to insert data into the tables, or we can use so-called structured query language. So we will show both methods. So let's create some data into our tables. So in the Explorer here, we can we start with the book table, we right click, select edit top 200 rows, and then on the right side we can start entering some values. So then, since book ID is an identity column, we don't need to fill out book ID, so we just enter some book titles. So let's start with a book about Visual Basic programming, like this. And here we could enter a summary, just enter some text, and then we can enter a new book. Software systems or something, and a summary like this. And now we have entered some data into the table. So here we see the book ID has been automatically generated for this table 1, 2, and next we want to enter some chapters inside those two books. So we right click on the chapter tables and select edit top 200 rows, and here we have the same. So here we have the book ID, which is the foreign key. So if you want to enter chapter for this book, we have to enter book ID 1. If we want to enter chapters for this book, we have to enter book ID 2. So let's start with the Visual Basic programming book. So let's say set 1. It should be 1, chapter 1. And the first chapter is introduction, like this. And then if you have a new chapter, you could set the same book ID 1 and chapter 2, and this chapter called start programming, like this. And then if you want to enter some chapters for this book with book ID number 2, we need to enter book ID 2, chapter 1. And this book could also have an, let's say, a preface like this. It could have a book about a chapter about computers, and then set the book ID 2, chapter ID, chapter number 2, and like this. We can also use a query. So let's use a query to see if the data we have stored here is actually saved into the tables. So let's select new query, and then we can select or write a simple query. Select all from book, like this, and select execute. Then we see we have created two books, one book Visual Basic Programming and one book called Software Systems, like this. And then we can select from the chapter table, select all from chapter, like this, and select execute. And then we see we got two books and we got two chapters in each book, like this. Now I want to show you the second method to how to insert data into the tables. That's using ordinary query. So let's just create a new query and then make a query for inserting data. So insert into book, like this. Then we have the columns. We have book title, summary, like this, and then you need to enter the values. So let's create a new book called C# or something, and then so that's the title, and then we can make the summary. Just enter some text like this, and then we can run the query by hit the execute like this. You see, so we added one row to the database, and then we can go back to this query to run it once more. And then you see the C# book has been created inside the database like this. So that was a short introduction to SQL Server, how to create tables and how to insert data into the tables, and also using queries for inserting data and to show the data inside the tables. Thank you.